Hi, it's Matt. I've got another 10 by 7 inch transparent watercolor. This time the subject of the painting is a singing chestnut-sided warbler. These are beautiful little birds, and they have very different plumage in the spring compared to in the fall. I got photo reference for this guy at McGee Marsh in Ohio. And it's rare to get a good photo of a singing bird, and I got one, so I thought this would be a fun subject for a painting. In the last series of paintings that I've been working on, I've been trying to kind of work on selective focus, where I have a detailed foreground that slowly fades into a misty, sort of out of focus background. And so that was kind of one of my goals for this one, to kind of keep working on that. In order to get that really misty background, I pre-wet the paper and soaked it. And I went over it a bunch of times so you know that it's evenly wet. Sometimes certain portions of the paper accept that initial wash more quickly and dry up. So I really made sure it was saturated well. And then I went about bringing in some greens and blues for what will be our foliage in the background. And I used a 1-inch flat brush. My greens were a mix of cadmium yellow and lemon yellow and phthalo green, and then my blues were a mix of, I believe that was a little bit of ultramarine and phthalo blue. I blotted up some of the extra pigment so it wouldn't collect at the edges of the paper and next to the frisket. It has a tendency to like to do that, so I'll suck up some of the extra stuff. While the paper was still wet, in order to get some really nice soft gradations, I started dropping in some other greens in what would be the shadow areas of the background of the trees that are behind the bird. And since the paper's still so wet, you can see the sheen on the paper. The water should carry those pigments across fairly well and leave them fairly smooth. As the paper starts to dry, you'll see it lose some of that sheen. And at that point, if you bring in extra pigment, you're likely to get back runs. This can be bad if you're going for perfectly smooth, or it can be good if you're looking for intentional back runs where you want to have some of those edges of the two pigments drying at different rates. And it can look a little bit like leaves sometimes if you put them in. So I hit this with the hairdryer to lock in the main first wash. And then I started bringing in some areas that were going to be out of focus, but the next layer where they're a little bit not super soft like the background, but they're starting to gain a little bit of definition. It's kind of a middle ground that's coming through. And I was using, I think this is a number 8 round brush for a lot of this. And some of these are the same colors that I had used for the background. I'm mostly using the hairdryer to speed up the process. Here I wanted to have a section where the branch was blurry in the background, so I re-wet the paper so it would carry the pigment across when I dropped it in. And that way I have a section that's kind of blurry in there. If I had done that on the dry paper, it would have kept a hard edge. So here I was working on more of those middle grounds where I'll have some sharp edges, and I wanted to let the brushwork and the pigment carry a lot of this instead of painting every last leaf. I wanted to kind of paint in some of the dark details and kind of carve the shapes out of the background a little bit by putting darks down and preserving some of the lights for the leaves that are going to be in front more. Here I'd switch to a number 6 round brush, and again I'm using a lot of the same pigments I had before. So you can start to see now that we're getting some of the kind of smoky, misty quality to the background, but we're getting some of the midground in addition, where I'm starting to get some sharp edges and some definition to the branches and the leaves. So here I removed the frisket at this point, and that allowed me to transfer the rest of my sketch to the paper. And once I had those lines down, I'd be able to wash in all the lightest local colors for each of those sections. It's funny, the birds often end up being one of the later things that I end up filling in because they're usually small on the page. I usually try to cover up the largest portion of the page as quickly as possible. That way you're balancing colors and matching things based on that. You can see my photo reference on the left is fairly similar. There wasn't as much blue sky as in the painting. It was a little more backlit. I was trying to even out the lighting in this. By doing that, I think I left my background a lot lighter and then was able to have a little bit less contrast on the branches. And I think it benefited from that in the painting in that I could control where your eye was going a little bit more. In the photo, some of the dark branches kind of pulled your eye off the edge of the page. In the painting, I could have that kind of go into the background. You can see on the upper right where the branch isn't super dark as it goes up into that corner. At this point I had switched to a number 2 round brush because I was doing a lot more detail. And on the left you can see how contrasty the photo was. Partway through, I was trying to kind of keep a good middle ground between detail in areas of that background where I have defined leaves, and then let it go into the kind of more smoky, less detailed, less sharp-edged portions of the leaves. And ideally, that gives your eye kind of a passage back to that smoky background where it's nice and blurry. Kind of brings you back in again in other parts of the painting where it does the opposite, comes from the smoky background and then kind of gains detail as it moves forward. Here is just putting in a lot of the kind of dark details to get a sense of balance for how much contrast do I want on the main subject of this and how much of that contrast do I want to bring into the other sections of the painting. When working on paintings, your eye tends to be first drawn to areas of maximum contrast. And so for here, that's the black and the white of the bird, and in some cases, kind of that black and yellow, which really sets off, it really grabs your eye and sets off the painting from the background. There are other things where if you have really saturated color, that always grabs your eye. So sometimes you're better off leaving some of this background maybe a little less saturated, that it'll sit further back and not command quite as much attention. And another thing that grabs your eye as far as detail and pulling your eye into things is how sharp your edges are. And in this I wanted to control having my sharp edges basically on the bird and the branches and some of the leaves, and then let that go into the background so it would recede better. And I think that gave it a better sense of depth than if everything kind of commanded the same amount of saturation, contrast, and sharp edges. Here I was just basically putting in details with the darks before hiding my name in the leaf and working on a few of the last details. Well, there you go, a singing chestnut-sided warbler or transparent watercolor. Hope you liked it. If you get a chance, leave a comment or have a peek at the blog.